Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com. Ozcast.
Hello world, I'm Tim Whiffen and you're listening to Strategicon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. On today's episode, John and David co-isolate before the restrictions would have disallowed to discuss the missing part of public discourse on COVID-19, sovereign capability. Many countries have suddenly realised the extent to which their manufacturing and trade leaves them in a vulnerable position in these trying times, especially Australia. With a long-term dependence and risk exposure to Chinese trade, the Australian parliamentary establishment is going to be faced with very difficult decisions should it choose to learn from the lessons of this ongoing global pandemic. Many Australian citizens are being misled and misinformed on the manufacturing capability of Australia and have turned to a scarcity mindset on toilet paper rather than on fuel or medicine. If Australia and other liberal democracies are to learn from this experience, what is the minimum preparation a country should have to prevent the resource scarcities and hysteria we are seeing now? To discuss this in the makeshift studio at John's house, we have Dr. John Bruni, the CEO of Sage International, and David Olney, Senior Strategic Analyst. Due to the circumstances of COVID-19, I was unable to be there to monitor this recording. However, John and David did a fantastic recording and I'm pleased to have edited it. Before we start today's episode, I would like to remind listeners that Strategicon can be found on the Ozcast network, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and on the Sage International Australia website, www.sageinternational.org.au.
Good afternoon, listeners, and welcome to today's episode of Strategicon. We are not in the studio because of the COVID-19 pandemic, so we are back to recording from the iPad and a microphone, so hopefully sound quality will be okay. Now, in the midst of self-isolation, I suppose that's what they're calling it.
I think it is.
It's self-isolation. John and I have decided that self-isolation doesn't get much work done, so we're currently in the midst of working together doing co-self-isolation.
Yay!
Welcome to co-self-isolation, John.
Oh, thank you very much, David. I'm so glad I'm here.
With company. Because it's much better than not having company.
Absolutely.
And thus far, we appear to be symptom-free.
Yes.
Now, that may mean we're asymptomatic. So if you hear coughing, it could be the beginning of something.
Or it just could be hay fever. In my case, it probably would just be hay fever.
We'll blame Lockie the cat.
Yeah, we could also do that too.
It's all the fault of Lockie the cat.
Absolutely.
Now, we have removed Lockie the cat from the room because we're quite sure that he would run across the iPad and dingle his little bell in front of the microphone. Because he's a very helpful little cat.
He is very helpful, yes.
And today's big issue, sovereign capability. Who else out there is struggling to get toilet paper? How many people are struggling to replace their asthma puffer? How many people out there have been told they can't buy more than 4 weeks of the drug they need for their heart or some critical medical condition? How many people out there are wondering how long infrastructure can work for when engineering/industrial components are not coming out of China to fix things? What we've really seen in the last few weeks is that letting the market set its own level works well when things are good, but the market has no interest in the well-being of society. So the question we keep coming back to is, yes, markets should be relatively free, and they should be regulated so they deliver fair outcomes to a degree, but to what extent should governments have the capacity to mandate a sovereign capability to ensure we have the resources necessary to deal with crises.
But doesn't this kind of interfere in the whole notion of the free market? I mean, aren't markets even under emergency conditions? Aren't they meant to be just operating in a normal way for profit, just in time, with a global supply chain, from low cost countries to the developed areas? And if we start down the slippery slope of having governments regulate the market, then we don't have a free market anymore.
Yeah, but have we ever had a free market? I would argue in most of human history, markets were small and local. Now, there was always trade in luxury goods or trade in specialist items. But in the main, markets were small because communities were small. I don't think we've ever had a global market like this where just in time has become so much of an issue. And to regulate a market is not to say that we have, communism or we have state control. We want regulation to ensure good behavior, that things are ecologically sensible, that they are socially responsible, that we can let people be rich through working hard, but we want to stop the excess of exploitation. So we're always going to regulate to a degree, even in good times. And most of the world does it, even though they pretend to be into free trade. As we can see, it takes a long time to negotiate free trade agreements because they don't negotiate free trade. They negotiate freer trade.
Or they negotiate protection.
Yeah. That's the other side of freer trade.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about here, and I think what I'd want to propose is, I think it would be good if in some industries the state said, right, pharmaceuticals, for example, let's not have a state-run pharmaceutical company that makes tons of drugs and tries to compete with private companies all the time. But let's have one small factory that over the year will produce different drugs every few weeks to put into the market, simply so when we can't import, we know we can produce what we absolutely need. That is worth going, this is a cost, it's an unavoidable cost, and the drugs we make here, we will use on something like the pharmaceutical benefit scheme.
That makes sense, David. But the thing is that we've invested so much of our time at the moment, the last 25, 30 years, in developing a global supply chain where there are known hubs controlled by monopolistic forces that, will create whatever they create and send it off to the marketplace from wherever they happen to be. Now, if the area from whence this stuff is manufactured is then hit by a global crisis or a war or any sort of calamity, the global supply chain then starts revealing itself being a far more fragile institution than it otherwise would be. I mean, for many years, the free marketeers have been saying, oh, look, it's fantastic. We get all this cheap stuff from the People's Republic of China or Nigeria or Indonesia, and it's really good for them and it's good for us. It's a plus-sum game. It's not a winner-take-all situation because, we're providing employment opportunities for countries that have, that are coming to the market from a very low base. So they're trying to promote it almost as a form of socially engineered goodness in a sense that the market is coming into these poorer countries, developing industries by which they recruit localized labor, which costs us in the West far less, and so therefore the product that comes to us is much more affordable. If we've invested at least a generation, if not more so, in developing this sort of global supply chain, and now we're starting to see it crumble before our eyes, how difficult is it for governments to then go down the path that you're suggesting? I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying. I just, again, think that we've been sold a pup in terms of we've invested so much energy and time trying to create this thing called the free market in the way that we currently understand it. Walking back from that is going to be enormously difficult.
I suppose there's two things about that. First, I don't think we actually invested much effort in developing the free-for-all we have. An authoritarian state decided to make low-cost labour available and to pour resources into infrastructure. And we outsourced the world's production to reduced cost of items, so countries that have not had real wage growth for over 30 years could feel they still had buying power.
Mm.
That is our quote-unquote economic success. We outsourced, and China used authoritarianism to set up manufacturing with low-cost labour.
Right.
That is not a success in terms of did people benefit in any way other than raw economics, leading to slightly more choices. That's great, but out of this we got a precarious system, and we're already seeing that as the cost of labour goes up in China, we're either going to move to robotic production or look for the even cheaper place to make things.
Well, the robotic production is an interesting thing, and I know that you and I have had this discussion quite often with regard to the new technology coming on stream. It's a way in which we can actually start redeveloping manufacturing in countries that began outsourcing everything in the 1980s to the People's Republic. So we can bring the jobs back, but those jobs aren't going to people, they're going to machines.
Well, we bring the jobs back to maintain the machines.
Right.
So the other side of this is, do we want specialist knowledge, or do we want to be incompetents who unpack shipping containers? Because that's fundamentally what this comes down to at the end of the day. The more things we don't make, at least at a minimal level, the less competence we have. And all you can say if we have less competence is that we therefore as a society must be more incompetent.
Let's take a step back from here. As with yourself and no doubt all our listeners, we're getting a lot of information from all sorts of places. Some of it's fake news, some of it's really interesting little insights. One of the interesting little insights that came my way over the last 24 hours is the fact that there is another way, and that is we don't have to worry about bringing the jobs back to our respective countries to build up economic redundancies, so we will never be, without toilet paper or hand sanitizer or anything else that happens to be critical to our lives when we end up having a shutdown of this nature. What we can just do is basically shrug our shoulders and depend on the workshop of the world, which is the People's Republic, and let them carry the can on this one and not do anything ourselves. Isn't that the simplest solution for us? And isn't it more likely that rather than doing the hard work of redeveloping industries and manufacturing in advanced economies, we're going to do the thing that we ought not do, and that is double down on China?
Then we get back to, do we want sovereignty in any way, shape or form?
Well, that's
because
another
if
question.
we are fundamentally incompetent, then with our competence will go our sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as we don't mind being a client state, and in history, immaterial of who the powerful state was, have powerful states ever treated client states well over time?
No, of course not. And under these conditions, they won't either. But I suppose what it does is it redeems the People's Republic for its bad management of COVID-19 early on in the piece, when they could have actually done something a little bit more effective. And if they're seen to be the workshop of the world, supplying the face masks, the sanitary gloves, and all those things that the West can't produce because we've outsourced everything to the People's Republic.
Not can't, won't.
Well, won't and yet can't, because the political will has to be there for us to actually do the thing that we need to do, and that is build the redundancies. Now, if we've got, the current political elite who is struggling to maintain things as they are. I mean, look, just going this morning to the local Coles supermarket, after going last night looking for, doing the toilet paper hunt, and I spoke to this guy, and he said, "Oh, look, John, one of the things that you need to do is you need to come here at 8 o'clock in the morning, after the older people go through, because they go through really early, so they're not fussed by the general population coming and snapping everything up. Then you've got a good chance of getting your toilet paper." Now, he was absolutely right. I went this morning and I got my toilet paper, so now I've got a little reserve just in case something happens and I end up falling over with COVID-19. But that the government hadn't introduced any form of rationing earlier on in the piece, and that it was up to supermarkets and their management to try to enforce standards of good behavior on people who just cleared out the shelves early on, which made it almost impossible for the non-hoarder community out there to get anything that they may need to survive this. It was just ridiculous.
Yeah, but this, to my mind, is another side of sovereign capability. Not necessarily even that we make the item. And in the case of toilet paper, we do make the item. There's massive plants in southeastern Australia that make toilet paper and tissues. But do we say, if you're going to get in this industry, there is a minimum stockpile that must always be maintained.
Yeah.
You can sell above and beyond that stockpile, and you should always be rotating stock through the stockpile. But there will be. And if you don't want to be in that industry and deal with that, go away, because someone else will.
Yeah.
And this idea that companies will run away, really? You think you're going to run away from providing staples that people will always pay for? Food necessities people will always pay for, and the certainty that they are going to be there calms people down. And people at the moment worried about their elderly relatives or friends don't need to be worried about what they're going to wipe their bottoms with.
Yeah.
That problem could have been removed.
Yeah. Well, it's going to take a long time for the various shopping centres to actually restock, and it's probably going to take an even longer time to get people not to try to play the system and hoard. So we're going to be in this problem of shortage for quite some time, I would imagine. But then it leads us to the other thing, and that is, well, okay, what is the role of government in this? Government, they have their national security planning councils that are behind the green door in the various parliaments of the world. Yes, they have to plan for issues of war and peace, but they also plan for the asteroid strike, the alien invasion, and obviously the pandemic must have been in their playbook at some point. Why were we
Do you see any evidence that it was in the playbook?
Well, look, I don't. And this is the thing. I don't see any evidence of it, but I do know that prior to COVID-19 happening, there have been many people who had been red teaming, working out what to do. And yet when the shit hit the fan, I'm sorry, listeners, but when the shit did hit the fan, we found that all governments across the world did not know what to do. It caught everyone by surprise, whether they happen to be a totalitarian state, whether they happen to be a democracy, or whether they fell between the cracks and were something in between.
The reality is we were disorganized all round.
Oh, absolutely.
So if we look, one of the greatest lessons of the Stoics, the premeditation of evil. Imagine your worst day and practice for it.
Yeah.
Well, it means we haven't really practiced. We might have had 5 people in a room red teaming it who wrote a document.
Yeah.
But where was the practice? Where was the actual implementation for how will we manage this? How will we do this? Where is the stockpile? How do we distribute? How do we manage distribution? How do we ration without it being onerous? It seems we've given up completely as we've assumed we are so happy to outsource, and we assume that people are so desperate to earn money that somehow the middle ground will be found. The only thing more irrational than thinking the market works at the moment is thinking that humans are rational. Each time our politicians come on the radio or television and say, if you don't calm down and behave, we will make it more extreme rules. Do they really think they're dealing with rational actors? Most people are barely rational at the best of times, let alone when they're stressed.
In a crisis, rationality gets thrown out the window. I mean, we just have to remember the hysteria that followed 9/11, where we all thought the terrorists were under our beds and were going to strangle us in the middle of the night. I mean, it was that sort of irrational fear that then got played in the echo chamber that's the media.
And the media have done it all over again.
Oh, they've done it.
It's only the last 2 days that I've heard figures of this many people have the virus who've been tested, this many people have died, and this many people have recovered. But the this many people have recovered number comes and goes.
Well, there's a funny little anecdote that I can tell you. I mean, I was invited onto radio to comment on the COVID-19 before it was declared a pandemic. And as I was actually being interviewed, the person who was interviewing me kept on with the idea of, it's a pandemic, why don't we declare it? It's a pandemic, why don't we declare it? And at the time, the WHO was calling it a global health emergency. And I did say to the person interviewing me, I said, look, I mean, I understand your concern and I understand the reason why you're sort of saying that it might be what you're saying it is. But as soon as you use the P word, if you think things are bad now under a global health emergency, wait until it becomes a pandemic. Things are going to be infinitely worse. And unfortunately, the following morning, I woke up to the news that the WHO declared the global health emergency of COVID-19 a pandemic. And as the prediction was, things got worse. So again, the media has a vital role as the fourth estate of being able to, take a message and pass critical information on to the public. But then there is a point at which the constant repetition of what's going on does something that is actually quite unwelcome, and that is that it makes people base everything on absolute fear. And if they're already irrational to begin with, if they can't deal with stress, generally speaking, when the media keeps on talking about death rate, infection rates, and we're talking about thousands of people dying and potentially millions of people being infected and or dying as a consequence, you're not going to get a lot of people sitting down and engaging in systems two thinking, well, you know what? Yes, the media can say this, that, and the other, but I'm going to take the high moral ground here and engage my rational brain and take a chill pill and just see things through. Take the reasonable precautions as the government has been suggesting that we all do, and not reach for the panic button. And we have not done that. And it's funny because, it's not like we didn't have a recent example. We spoke about 9/11 as being, where all the panic merchants came from. And a lot of the anti-Muslim, it's not really, well, it can be, but it's not necessarily always racism appears, is because we kept on pushing so hard. This is a Muslim thing. This is an Arab thing. This is something that comes from the Middle East. So, that message that was constantly driven home to most people who were not Muslim, who were not Arabic, who did not come from the Middle East, was that it was a problem that came from a particular region, from a particular group of people. And those people of that ilk who happen to live among us must be guilty of some wrongdoing. And we're seeing the same thing play out with Chinese people now as a consequence of the so-called Chinese virus, which our dear friend Donald Trump started playing with his words. And you know what? It may very well have been that the People's Republic was not necessarily the best manager of COVID-19. And yes, it may have found its origins in the People's Republic, but you know what? You can't hit all Chinese people as a consequence of this. There, a lot of them, and not all of them, were responsible for managing COVID-19.
Well, the majority of them just suffered through it,
well, exactly,
like everyone else.
Exactly. So again, we come back down to who's rational in all of this, and what role does the media play in managing the message in a way that allows us to take that deep breath and think clearly about what's happening to us.
This is another case of premeditation of evil.
Yeah.
Where's the practice by the media for reporting on things where we need people to have more information, but we also need them to be calm?
This episode's musical interlude comes courtesy of Heartway with their track Better. Support them or listen to them on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify with the links in the episode description.
Shut. My dude, thinking way back, we living fast, my dude. Spread love and love is supreme, that's my mood. That dude, paid my own dues, I do whatever it takes just to break through. Brand new things I never knew, like one man can move a thing he never do, like let the woman choose, cause she know the truth. Yes, you are the truth. Yes, you are the truth, my dude.
Moving with you, moving with you, grooving with you.
Yeah, we can make it better. You my ladybug Mecca, Bahamadia left eye with more letters. Never a fair weather friend, never pretend we blend bird of a feather. Do us with ease, saying whatever. Whatever is cool. Exceed the measure, it's true. A deuce coupe and the makers of you. Soul takes one place and a plate with some food. If it's you, let's just do what we do when we do. T.Y., that's just you and me. Call you my dude, but nothing's what it used to be. Closer than close, much more than usually. Base in case the heart's abused me beautifully. Lower end theories, keep your coat in. Cars coasting, coconuts and lotion. Eyes on thigh, thighs on mine. The feeling is a song from my lips while I lie, cause I can do better. Ain't safe for you, drink pain for you. There is no better. Remain with you when it rains for you. I can do better. Ain't safe for you, drink pain for you. There is no better. Remain with you when it rains for you.
Moving with you, moving with you, grooving with you.
Yeah, we can make it better.
Moving with you, moving with you, grooving with you.
Yeah, we can make it better.
That's what I
make it better, better.
Better by Heartway, which of course we're hoping that many of us and the system in general are left better off than they went in after this crisis. John and David are asking how we could be better and if that is at all likely in Australia.
Now, it's quite clear that the medicos wanted to get us all to take it more seriously. So the medicos have passed the message of flattening the curve as, sort of strongly as they can. But I'm amazed how many people still ask me to explain flattening the curve.
Yep.
Because the government explanations, not to be rude, are sort of
Woeful.
incomplete and jargon-filled.
Yeah.
And just really, it's taken them a week and a half of talking about flattening the curve to start to be a bit more cohesive. Now, with the quality of messaging that's been done at different times in history on different issues, and the number of people who are now all about understanding how to use media effectively, how could it be being done in such a mediocre way? What it suggests is there was no practice. And there was no practice on test subjects to go, how are you responding to this? What did you take away? Which bit of the message did you pay attention to?
It comes down to this thing that we can't really escape from, and that is that it's not like we didn't have outbreaks of calamitous potential
We've
before.
had SARS, MERS and Ebola
That's
since
right.
9/11.
Right. We had people on the ground who were at the bleeding edge, so to speak.
Literally
of-
with Ebola.
Yeah. With regard to these particular illnesses, knowing full well the potential for them to break out into global pandemics. And yet, whatever the messages were learnt in those particular areas under those circumstances are totally lost on the current political structures, basically. And this I find incredible because, but then again, there's a saying, an old military saying, and that is that no plan ever survives first contact. And maybe this is also a case where, the idea of a global pandemic was just so horrifying to most people that it was much easier for us just to think, we'll plan about, a global pandemic, just like we're going to be planning about a space alien invasion of planet Earth. It's kind of one of the likely scenarios, but it's at the extreme end of likelihood. And it's just so dark and so awful that, we can have a couple of Hollywood movies made of it and they will be very dystopian in nature, but we know it's not going to happen now. It's not going to happen on our watch, right?
The idea that no plan survives first contact is in some ways a misnomer, because what that sort of historical throwaway line neglects to illuminate is that every military officer is trained in small unit tactics. Every sergeant knows how to manage their platoon with small group tactics. Every corporal can lead their section in small group tactics. The plan can fall over, but we can't or shouldn't question the competence of people whose first training and whose fundamental skills are in working effectively as a small group. So even if the plan falls over, the competence should become evident. And historically, what we see is that good leaders with lots of practice, even if it goes wrong, find a way to put it all back together and make it go better.
Yeah, but you hit the nail on the head here, David. Practice.
Yep.
Who was practicing for a global pandemic?
Well, who's practicing for making sure that small competent groups can come back together and become a cohesive whole for anything?
Wow.
This is beyond the idea of let's let the market take care of it. Some things the market can take care of. The market can take care of delivering televisions. But do we want the market being the only thing that takes care of the delivery, maintenance and availability of ventilators? I don't.
Do we want the market to dictate who's going to remain employed during this crisis? And as we can see quite clearly, people are losing their jobs with the prospect that their job loss will be permanent, because we don't know in the post-COVID-19 environment whether or not some of those industries that you've just been dismissed from are going to make a comeback.
Just the simple thing we were talking about this morning of airlines. Historically, most of the world's great airlines were initially established with government money as sort of pinnacles of national pride. how many governments are ever going to spend money again to rebuild the national airline
Yeah.
that's long since been privatized? So in some industries, we can see that for the sake of the global economy working, if the state doesn't intervene, the amount of time it will take to rebuild these industries could be far slower than is prudent for stimulating the economy and getting everything going as fast as possible.
We have these semi-state institutions, like for instance, if we look at Etihad and Emirates Airlines in the UAE, they are very much government sponsored. The likelihood of them actually falling over is far less because, of course,
They won't be allowed to fall over.
They won't be allowed to fall over by the UAE government, and the UAE government has still got enough oil and gas reserves to pump prime whatever they need as a national industry.
And what do they do to rebuild their economy? They get people back on planes.
Well, they have to because they're so reliant on expatriate labour.
Precisely. So they need planes going
the planes.
in and out.
Oh, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and the expats themselves need to know that they can also travel home
Get to
whenever they
work
need.
and get to home.
Right.
So
right.
what we see is that in reality, immaterial of the state of markets, many things states will get in the middle of the issue for the benefit of their own revenue base, their tax base, their ability to look credible, maintain the support of their populations.
One thing that bedevils me, because I was listening to Blind Insights, and I have to say I really enjoyed the MMT, or the Modern Monetary Theory conference that you and Tim went on. But what I find so perplexing now is that governments around the world are spending trillions of dollars in band-aid measures to help support people in crisis, the economies, companies, whether large or small scale. And yet there doesn't seem to be anything other than band-aid measures when you really look at it. I mean, for instance, the small penny packets of money that are going to be doled out to people in need in the United States and Australia in particular, they're temporary measures. They won't pay the mortgage rates, they won't pay the bills, they won't do anything, but they'll give you like $730 odd to spend on luxury items, if you can call anything within that area a luxury item. But it's not of any use to the people who are going to be in crisis in terms of, ongoing payments, because, we may be in a global pandemic, but companies will still want to squeeze that last bit of extra revenue out of you if you happen to be a customer of a particular product. That is part of your capitalist society. So why do you think that countries have not instituted a plan whereby there is something like a universal basic income that can, at least for the period of time that we're going through this crisis, will give substance to individuals who are now at risk, needy, they've just lost their jobs, they may not have any savings, they have bills to pay. I mean, there are all these other aspects to the human security moving forward in the COVID-19 crisis, because one of the things that we don't talk about is the rate of suicide is going to go through the roof because people won't be able to afford just everyday items, let alone paying for the roof over their head.
This is one of those things. How many ways do we want governments to have to intervene? If we intervene in the mortgage market, intervene in the rental market, intervene in multiple markets and ways, it gets more and more complex. So in a lot of ways, a crisis income package that simply says, if you've lost your job, get this form signed by your boss electronically, and we will give you 80% of your income your last day of work.
Like the Johnson government has implemented in Britain.
Straight away. Make it simple. Yeah. Your boss says, look, I had to sack this person.
Right.
Also have a variant that says, we're reducing our hours dramatically. The person who used to do 5 days is now only going to be doing 1. There, again, another variant of the form that says, this person will only be doing 1 day instead of 5. Top them up to the equivalent of 80% of normal income. And then let the rest of the economy function because people have money. If people can spend money, then the bank gets paid, then people go shopping, then people do all the little things, and you're only intervening in one way that is relatively simple.
Yeah.
You're finding out where people are at, and you're putting money into their account. money that can be created simply by putting it there. In the short term, this is by far the best solution because instead of being involved in everything, you make it one relatively simple proposition with a caveat, and that is the minute your circumstances change and you have access to work again, you need to let us know, because when we do the random audit, if we see you manipulated it, you will be paying it all back. So make it an honest system with the potential for oversight.
Yeah.
But keep it simple. And yet what we're seeing is the opposite. More and more ridiculous. Let's tinker with this, tinker with that, tinker with that. And in all, yes, all those things are useful, but they all make it unnecessarily complicated to manage in the short term. And in the short term, if people have money, people will sort most of their own problems.
You know, when I look at the television coverage of long Centrelink queues, and for those of you who are overseas, Centrelink is Australia's social welfare net, effectively. But the long queues at Centrelink, because the institution of Centrelink had been gutted by successive governments. The fact that there are not enough people manning the Centrelink offices around Australia to help out in this crisis. The fact that the Centrelink technology is failing. So even though the government is encouraging people to don't go to the queues because of social distancing issues, do it online. Every time you try to access online,
on the first day.
It gets overwhelmed, and it continues to be overwhelmed. So if you don't have the people and the technology in place to deal with these kind of crises, can this COVID-19 act as a filter for future policymakers, whereby now we have to start thinking of building those redundancy features up? Because I don't know about you, but I think COVID-19 seems to be something that may recur in another form, in another way, at some time in the future. And if we're not prepared now and we're learning on the run now, if we lose those lessons that we're learning now, we'll be in a far worse state sometime down the track were another virus to take on global dimensions.
It's another case where we implement strategies normally for average use, not highest imagined use. So Centrelink barely functions with average use.
Yeah.
It's been overwhelmed with high use. Lecturing at university this semester, the software we're meant to use now to record lectures online from home has been overwhelmed at multiple universities in Australia this week. Once again, for average use, it would have been fine. But when it really matters, there is no redundancy, or there's insufficient redundancy. So this is another case of this isn't going to be a one-off. It may be years before we have the next problem, but what are we willing to pay for to have the redundancy to maintain an effective running system where competent people can get on with their jobs with the resources they need to do it effectively?
What is the price? What is the price that we're willing to pay for that?
What is the price of confidence in the sustainability of the system?
Yeah.
And we really need to have a proper debate about this, not about how much money we're going to be given in the long run. For now, give people money. It can be worked out later.
Yeah.
From an MMT perspective, it's not a major problem. Universal basic income forever is a problem. But in a crisis, it's totally manageable. And that's the thing with this crisis. We're seeing neoliberal governments go back on everything they came to believe in a fortnight because it didn't work. It could only deal with the good times. It could not deal with crisis. Now, if we come out of this crisis and they all tighten the purse strings and stop spending, the recovery will be slow,
Anemic.
a trickle, pathetic.
Yeah.
Look at what happened when we came out of the GFC. The very rich stayed very rich, and the very poor lost half of the government services they relied on because of austerity. Do we really want to do that again and have 10 years of doldrums economic activity?
And I suspect strongly, unless I'm wrong, and please, whoever is in a political position, prove me wrong on this. The fact of the matter is that we'll probably end up having a period of austerity because the government will tell us,
because they haven't learned the lesson.
No, they haven't learned the lesson. And I think that, with the current crop of political leaders that we have around the world right now, you can literally grab them by the scruff of their neck and smack their head into a wall, and they still will come out not learning the lesson that, there is a wall over there to be avoided. Let's avoid the wall.
Austerity will only make things worse and will only slow the recovery.
Yeah.
Again, the basic rules of MMT. You can create money anytime you need to in your own sovereign currency to pay for real resources to achieve a public good as long as you manage the risk of inflation. Now, the policy settings for that can be very complex, but all you've got to keep in mind is those 4 basic rules. And, for anyone that thinks austerity is a good idea, for an individual person, it can work well. For an individual country, it can work well. But any time it happens broadly across a community of people or a community of nations, it is catastrophic. And to prove this point, just go away and read Mark Blyth's book, Austerity, the easiest to read and most significant book written after the GFC to show that austerity doesn't work. He describes austerity as a unicorn looking for a magic bag of salt.
Yeah, how appropriate. Yeah.
I think we might have covered everything we wanted to, and that is we really need to talk about what we're willing to pay for consistently to have sustainable services and resources available. And that debate needs to transcend sides of politics and be about what kind of society do we want to maintain in the worst of times.
Well, let's just hope that in the corridors of power, people are seriously contemplating these deeper issues. I mean, I fear that we're creatures of habit, and as soon as the worst of COVID-19 disappears, we'll go back to business as usual, which we did with GFC very much. But in many ways, there's that level of institutionalized complacency that we tend to kid ourselves that we can restore normalcy. I don't think that we can restore it now. I think that there is something fundamental there. It's affecting geopolitics. It's affecting domestic politics. It's affecting the way that we think about our economies. And really, we need some form of international Bretton Woods style, meeting. And I'm not talking about the G20 where they all, swim in their lakes of milk and climb their mountains of butter.
Yeah, that live in neoliberalism in an unreconstructed form. We don't need that.
No, we don't. No, but we do need people of goodwill coming together.
With the best ideas and an open mind to go, we need to do better.
Yeah.
And we need to do better in a way that can last.
Yeah.
That still allows people to be rich, still allows people to find opportunities, still allows people to do just enough to be okay if that's all they want to do, but ensures that when things are bad, that we don't see the kind of disorganization and lack of resources and lack of planning that we've seen this time.
And on that very positive note, I think that will be it. Now, for you listeners out there, I am going to be sending these files to young Timothy, who, of course, is going to be doing a sterling job patching all of this together. So I sincerely hope that by the end of that process, this podcast turned out relatively well. Wish us luck. For now, goodbye.
Sorry, Tim, and bye-bye, listeners.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you could subscribe to Strategicon through the Ozcast network, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and please like us on the Sage International Australia Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate your support. Also, please comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International Australia site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our products, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. Until next time, goodbye.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.